So again, thank you everyone who is here for part two of our online webinar series on the benefits of native seed saving and how to propagate. So to begin, I just ask that everyone turn off your mics for the portion of the presentation that Samantha brings us. On behalf of Bee City Kawartha Lakes and Pollinator Partnership Canada, I'm very happy to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. And in part one, we learned about the benefits and the steps of native seed collection. So tonight's focus will be on native seed stratification, timing and considerations, as well as the how-tos of native seed starting. I'm pleased to welcome back Samantha Medeiros of Pollinator Partnership Canada. She's their Partnership and Operations Manager and tonight's presenter. Samantha will be leading our land acknowledgement tonight and walk us through the basics of native seed starting. So short discussion period will follow Samantha's presentation. And then, as you know, the presentation is being recorded, so that recording and I believe slides will be made available at a later date. Don't feel that you need to scribble everything down. Just please sit back and enjoy. And with that, I will hand this off to Samantha.
Wonderful. Thanks, Christine.
You're welcome.
So we're going to talk about the basics of growing native plants from seed. Like I said, for some folks, some of this might be a review, some of this might be brand new. I really hope that I can just bring a new perspective and make things a little bit more accessible for folks, because this world can be really daunting of growing native plants from seed, and I don't think it has to be. I think if we start small, we can be much more successful. So I'll just put a disclaimer. And my name's Samantha Medeiros. I work for Pollinator Partnership Canada. I've received a wonderful introduction. So our website is at the bottom, and you can always connect with me in a couple different ways. We have a lot of really cool resources on our website, like eco-regional guides that are based on your location. We have Native Plant Finder, where you can type in your postal code and be able to find native plants that would work for your area. We also have a bunch of land managing guides that are available for agriculture, for roadsides, for all sorts of different kinds of landscapes that you might want to create some habitat in. So the focus today is going to be primarily on growing for individual and small scale use. There are different and more complex methods and protocols for scaling up, and a lot of nuanced things for certain species that are a bit more complex. So I'm going to talk really generally, and hopefully you'll be able to glean information from this that can help influence and inspire you to learn more and have a bit of a background in the world of native plants and propagation, because it can be really complicated jumping in for the first time, or even when you've been doing it for a couple of years. One thing that I'm going to talk about a lot is know before you grow, and just become acquainted with one or two species, and from there expand, because your knowledge can build. And if you focus more on a couple things instead of everything, it's much more exciting, and I think you might be able to get more out of it. So basically, this is just about empowering you and getting you to get excited and want to start. Today, I'm speaking from Nogojiwanong, Peterborough, Ontario, the traditional treaty and homes of the Mississauga, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chippewa nations. I'm a settler on Indigenous land, and we're all bound by the treaties. Those are our original Canadian laws. These lands are associated with the Williams Treaty of 1923 and Rice Lake Treaty number 20 of 1818. If you're listening from Kawartha Lakes, we share the same treaties. And if you're not listening from Kawartha Lakes, I strongly suggest you check out your treaties. The most basic thing we can do is to learn about our treaties, and these are the original agreements of the land that we live and work on. So knowing those original agreements is a really good step towards allyship. And when I do this land acknowledgement, I want to think a bit about the time of year that we're in. each season brings with it necessary parts of the earth cycles, and I often hear people talking about how winter is a really hard time for them and that they really don't like winter, you know? And I hear that from other seasons too, but winter seems like the time of the year that people dislike most. And I want to challenge that notion with a different perspective. I learned from Dan Longboat, Haudenosaunee knowledge holder. He introduced me to a book called The Words That Come Before All Else. And it's a book on environmental philosophies of Haudenosaunee peoples. And this book had a chapter on weather systems. And basically, you know, take from this, interpret this as you will, but the earth hears us. The earth feels our energy. So when we say that we like or dislike a certain season, creation, the earth will hear that. And it affects the way that those systems naturally work and function. So when we look at some of the broader issues that are happening in the world, sometimes I think back to that chapter in the words before all else about weather systems, and I think about what we put out into the atmosphere and what we say about these seasons. So as part of the land acknowledgement that I'm bringing today, I want to try to challenge us to think about how we talk about and engage with the seasons and with the weather systems. No weather system is good or bad. Even fire can start seeds and create a whole new landscape for different plants to come out. And as much as that can be unfortunate for humans, there's always something new, and there's a bigger story to be told. So winter is a time of rest and activity, and at least on Turtle Island, Canada, many native plants need this rest period and this cold period to fulfill their life cycles and start new. So we need a good blanket of snow, not just for seeds, but we also need this to fight disease and to cut down the amount of pests that we have, and maybe invasive pests that we have. And so I embrace winter, and I want to say thank you to the winter and this season for helping us necessitate that important cycle each and every year. In this workshop on growing native plants from seed, I hope that I can share in even the dark and cold and icy seasons. Life's just starting. So if you struggle with seasonal affective disorder, I hope that this can bring a little bit of joy and excitement and hope in the cold season, because nothing is more fun than starting seeds, in my perspective. And I think also, I just want to end that with the concept that plants are living things. We have to respect living things and pay attention to them. And just as we are bound to the treaties, plants have treaty rights, animals have treaty rights. We are all treaty beings. So I give deep thanks and reverence to the original peoples and plants who have and continue to care for the diverse landscapes within what we call Canada. And may we all work towards continuing to be in better balance with these life and earth systems. The best thing we can do is learn and humble ourselves and work towards goodness in everything we do. So through seed saving and sowing today, may the plant kingdom teach us a thing or two about being better humans and being in better relationship with the earth. I said a lot, so we could sit with that for a second. So I'll just share a little bit about my philosophy on seed starting. And I said this already, but it's important to reiterate that all seeds want to do is grow. Don't overcomplicate that. Pay attention to the basic needs of those seeds and meet that first. Learn by doing. My experience, at least, is to learn by doing. Take lots of notes and figure out what works and what doesn't. And it doesn't have to be expensive. So start with doing do-it-yourself options. Just pay attention to your intuition and start small. This is our outline. I won't be talking about native shrubs and trees. Sometimes starting seeds from berry bushes or nuts can be a lot more complicated. So I'm going to start on the most basic stuff. And like I said, we can build on that knowledge later. I'll also talk about just some basic terms and different methods of stratification. And then I'll go into the 3 methods of propagation that I find to be most accessible. And it'll kind of be in order of what I find easiest to what I have personally found to be a little bit more complicated. Why grow native plants? Maybe everybody here is already excited about this and they already know why they would grow native plants. But there's over 800 bees native to Canada and other pollinators. They have unique relationships. They have host plants. They have been adapting and living together and evolving with these native plants. So what better food and medicine for the landscape, for us, than to continue those cycles? Native plants have ecosystem services, so they help like with erosion reduction, flood control. They can provide medicines to us, and some can even sequester carbon in the ground. Many native grasses sequester carbon and keep that in the ground. So we should think more about native grasses as a solution for mitigating climate change. Native plants are adapted to their local environment, and they'll continue to adapt to their local environment. They are drought resistance. They will continue to grow and drop seed. That'll make them more and more adapted to the landscape they're in. And everybody loves saving money. So the last thing I would say is that propagating saves you a lot of money. Up front and in the long term, you start with some seeds, you'll have a lot of plants. And in the long term, the seeds will just keep giving themselves to you. And you can share them with friends. My favorite thing is that anybody can plant a seed. There's different scales of complexity, but it's pretty addictive when you know that you could just shake up a dried up plant pod and toss it, and that there might be plants that come from that. I find that when I'm feeling blue, that's the most exciting thing is to think about what I'm going to be growing in the summer. So the only things that I'm going to keep saying is to learn the needs of the plants you're trying to grow and to document everything, the species, the origin of the seeds. It might even be interesting to know what year, and what time of year even you grew it, because you'll see the plant change over the years as it grows and evolves. I had an ethic for seed starting that I shared with everybody. And I thought to myself, is there an ethic for, I had an ethic for seed saving in my last presentation, but this time I thought to myself, is there an ethic for seed starting? I'm not sure. But then I kind of created a couple things that I thought were important. So sow what you can grow, I think, is the most important ethic, because if anybody else has experienced this, you get really excited and you get overzealous and you sow way more seeds than you can actually handle and take care of. And it's not just in the process of the seed starting, it's in the watering phase, it's in the potting up of the plants, it's in the storing, and then it's in finding a house for those plants. So have a plan for your extra plants and think about, some seeds won't make it, but I like to try to think that every one of these plants that I'm sowing, every one of these seeds has the potential to grow up and be an adult plant. So think about that when you're sowing your seeds, and try to think about a plan as they're growing for what might happen. Part of knowing what you're growing is also knowing how it might interact with the landscape. Some plants can be toxic if ingested, so just know who's around the landscape and make sure that everybody's going to be safe. Have fun and be patient is my last ethic, because you might not see things happen right away, but it'll be really exciting when they do. And I'm not sure. I kind of want to ask everybody else if they have an ethic that they would want to bring to seed starting. And I can maybe take a second and just, if anybody wants to popcorn a thought.
One thought I have relates to just record keeping and ensuring genetic diversity. And so record keeping it can be great as far as, I mean, you always have something to refer to, but important notes to make would be where you collected your seeds from. You can mark GPS points, nearest intersections, just have an idea of where you're gathering. Also, record information on the health of the host plant. You want to be selective, find a nice, healthy, robust, happy plant, and maybe gather your seed from that. And then, as well, my third thought would be to again branch out. Don't just collect seeds from one area, or restock your garden with seeds from that. Maybe trade with a community member in a different municipality. If you're going out and actively collecting seed, consider, Samantha walked us through this in the first webinar, but you can act like an animal and maybe take a pocket full of seeds, and when you travel somewhere else you could disperse them, and so that helps genetic diversity. And likewise, when you're doing propagation at home, if you collect from different areas, you gain helping genetic integrity. So it's kind of maybe a five rule. You collect from 5 different host plants and try to stay 5 kilometers apart from each host plant, and then do a good mix of your seeds and chuck them, wherever you're growing. So that's my 2 cents.
Samantha, I had one as well. Again, I didn't get a chance to see your first one on seed saving. I'm assuming that it's there, but about the collect only about 10% of the seeds of the area where you were at. Obviously, to leave everything else for wildlife and for the plant to reproduce itself, especially with more rare type plants. But the one for me, I think you've probably done on both webinars, is to be free and sharing your education and information with other people. Why I'm so passionate and why I've already been having some conversations with Christine off screen and email is that my information that I have in my head is free to share with other people. And just like you're doing now, the stories that you've already been telling are going to invoke passion in others. And the only way you can do that is share your information. And that's near and dear to me. If I can teach people that have no idea about where they are and about what wildlife is there, and then talk about the pollinators and native plants that are there, people get super excited and they're going to use that information to teach other people. So.
Did anybody want to add anything else? I see a question, but maybe we'll go to the questions at the end. That's a wonderful thing that you said, Steve, because folks often, you hear of this like scarcity complex, right? Where people think that there's, these things need to be protected and held safe. And for plants that are rare, yes, we should really protect those plants. And for all plants, I think we need to engage in respectful seed saving, where we're not taking more than we need. And we're thinking about, I might be taking some from this plant, but somebody else might be taking some from this same area. So there's a treaty that's called the One Dish, One Spoon Treaty. And if we take the teachings from that treaty, where we only take enough that we need for ourselves to survive, so that the next generation, so that other people can also have resources for them, I think that this can apply to seed saving and seed collecting and distributing.
Exactly.
Brandy shares to share seedlings. In terms of sharing seedlings, aim to share the seedlings with others to plant the seed in their spaces as well. And that's great, because I love volunteer plants when they show up and you didn't really intend them there, but here they are. And I think we should have volunteer native plants all over the place. So let's get into the basics. I'm sure lots of you know, stratification is the process of preparing seeds to mimic the natural conditions that they need to get the seed to activate, which is another way of saying breaking dormancy. Germination, I like this definition. It's from a really old botany book, but it's the change of seed from dormant state to the active growing state. And that just locks down in my head that every seed needs an activation to send the message to start. So what is that activation? And that activation is some form of stratification. But propagation is making new plants from existing ones, and you could do that in a lot of different ways. It's not just starting things from seed, it's dividing healthy plants, it's taking cuttings, it can be a lot of different things. So many of us know how to start a sunflower or a vegetable plant of some kind, but there's a little bit of a more complex method of stratifying for native plants. And I kind of like to think of these as the 4 elements too, right? So there's cold, dry stratification, which is mimicking winter conditions, and that's what it says. So you can put it in you could put your seeds in a bag or loose in or probably protected by rodents. So in a bag of some kind, but an unheated building or directly in the fridge with no moisture. And that's one way to activate the seeds. Other seeds need cold, moist, which would be, so I imagine cold, dry to be, maybe I'm wrong, but for them to just be standing on the seed stalk throughout the winter and then dispersing maybe in the spring or late winter, or even in the summer. Cold moist stratification is mimicking another form of winter condition, and that to me is the bed of snow that covers the seed. So you could do that outdoors in a way that I'll chat about, the refrigerator in a refrigerator. I'll also chat about that, but I like to think of that blanket of snow being the cold moist stratification. Scarification can be fire. It can be, or hot water is kind of fire, but scarification is just basically nicking a seed or scratching it, and that can mimic animals digesting or nibbling or even just scratching into the ground. Hot water, we don't really do that with so many different flower seeds that I know of, but that can happen for prairie plants, for nuts and fruits I've heard of before. So I won't get into that, but that is a method of stratification. There's also a form that's just double dormancy. So some plants actually need 2 hot and cold cycles to wake up. I really liked this slide when I made it. The original gardeners. So what do all these animals have in common? I try really hard to look at nature and see what they're doing if I'm not sure. I don't know, that's the original, that's the best textbook for me. So I try to look and see what they're doing. And my favorite critter in the whole world is a blue jay. They're just so smart. But when I learned that they're responsible for planting more trees than squirrels, that just made me love them even more. So a blue jay can plant up to 100 or more acorns in a day by caching them. And of course, they're not going to find them all. So how many acorn forests or trees, oak trees, are responsible for the responsibility of these blue jays that they've created these? And just like bison, they kind of like scratch and press into the ground as they're lumbering around. They might brush up against some dried seed heads. They might eat and then defecate those. So that's a way that nature just naturally sows seeds and has them grow into the next plant, and also distributes them across the landscape. I would say bears do the same. Bears eat berries and nuts and plants, and even the digestive system of those seeds going through that process. Some of those seeds are actually needed, they need to be eaten in order to have that thick outer layer of their seed broken away or scarified, just so that they can be planted. So, how much bear scat is actually growing native plants? I think that would be a really fascinating study. Mouse caches, ant caches. Basically, if you're in doubt, just kind of look around and see what's happening all around you, because these are the original gardeners. And get back to nature. So step back and observe, like I said. And what I try to do is just consider what's happening. So when is it happening? What time of year are these plants being distributed or collected or brushed off? What natural event is happening? What happens when that happens? And where do the seeds go? So in this instance, I learned from Joseph Petawanakwat that seeds are collected by ants and brought into their ant homes. And sometimes they'll eat the outer layer of the seeds and then spit out the embryo, right? And then outside of an ant home, you'll see all these native plants growing, or like just little piles of seed at the outside of the ant holes. And I just find that so fascinating that they're literally moving these seeds from place to place. And there's this symbiotic relationship here. So how does it get there? You know, maybe that volunteer plant didn't just blow there. Maybe an animal carried it along in one way or another. So when we're talking about native plants and growing them from seed, I think this can apply to a lot of different things, but remember these things before starting. We've talked about documenting and making notes. We've talked about wildlife in a beneficial way, but wildlife can also be not so beneficial when we're trying to grow our own plants. And you also have to think about potting up your plants. Native seeds need ideal moisture and sun and soil requirements. We also need to think about how large and wide they'll grow to be. I think it doesn't do any justice if someone's getting native plants for the first time and just learning about them. If we give them a plant that's not going to fit the needs of their garden or space, it kind of sets the relationship off in a not so good way. So learn about the plants that you're giving away so that you can accurately decide if this plant is a good place for it when it grows up to be big and strong. And then to think, what time of year do these plants bloom at? So it's a good idea to do the 3x3 rule, 3 spring plants for pollinators, 3 spring plants and 3 of the same species, 3 different varieties of summer plants, and 3 at least individuals of of each of those species, and the same thing for fall, for late summer or fall blooming plants. 3, 3, 3. So just knowing the basics of each plant helps you with success. And that's why it's really important to label seeds and plants, because you honor them by knowing who you're working with. You're collecting where you're labeling where they were collected, when they were collected. You're labeling the seeds when they're in trays and pots, and especially if you give them away, it's good. Unless you can really ID what you have, it's good to label your seeds and your trays and everything you give away. So here are just some things that you might want to include: species name, variety, the location and year you planted and or harvested the seeds. And I like to add who or where you got it from, because you might have gotten it from a landscape, but you might have also gotten these seeds from somebody and they had been holding on to them for a while. So that lineage, that story can be really interesting, especially as the plants age and mature. And at the end, when in doubt, too much information is better than not enough. Seeds are alive. I already said it. When you're saving seeds deteriorate over time, and this affects germination rates. Germination rates are going to be affected anyways, because not every seed you sow is going to actually survive. But the age of your seed, the storage method, and the timing of when you collected the seeds can contribute to the life that's within those seeds. And one thing that I found really good as a reminder is, if you're storing seeds, that's not going to really do anything for conservation or keeping heirloom plants, because the seeds are going to lose their viability over time. You should grow and recollect those seeds and keep them healthy and spread those seeds, because I know that sometimes you hold on to seeds for a little too long and they don't work anymore, and that's kind of sad. So if you collect too many, you should share them, and you should try to grow them if you can, or just distribute them in nature. Oh, and also seed libraries. Let's not forget about how cool seed libraries are. Use them and create more seed libraries in your neighborhood if they don't exist. Squirrels, chipmunks, birds, and other critters, like I showed in the other slide, they use native seeds, nuts, fruits, and plants as a food resource. But because of that, they will also want to snack on the plants that you're growing. So if you're growing with seed trays, you need to make sure that you're putting a mesh layer on top of that just to kind of keep the predation down, as well as the weather being a little bit of a danger for your plants. So pay attention to the weather. If it's going to be hailing really hard, don't baby your plants, but you might want to just put them in a place that's a little bit more sheltered. We want our plants to be successful. So take care of them. You don't have to baby them, but pay attention to the different weather cycles just as much as you would pay attention to rodents. And as well, undesired seeds might blow into your trays. So it's really valuable to put a nice, I'll get into this, but to put a nice layer of, leaves or other kinds of brush on top of your seed trays or your seeded areas, just to reduce the pressure of weeds that will go into your plants. 3 different methods that I'm going to talk about. Fall sowing, which is direct seeding right before first frost. Outdoor seed trays, and I talked about the pest guards. And the refrigerator method. You start indoors, and then you bring them, and then you pot them up into trays, and you pot them up. You start getting them used to being outdoors around May and June, and then you might want to pot them up again before they're ready to go. I literally find it from easiest to hardest, 1, 2, 3. So for some reason, people might be really great at doing refrigerator method, but for me, my time management is not the greatest, and you can run the risk of your seeds getting moldy in the refrigerator method. You have to be on top of, what's all happening, keeping an eye on your plants. I find that I have success just direct seeding, and I've even direct seeded in January, and I feel like it was successful. So it would be cool for me to track those germination rates and do more studies on that. But my favorite methods are the first 2 methods, and I'll do my best at explaining refrigerator method. But know that I don't learn from my lack of paying attention and timing for the refrigerator method. So direct sowing in fall or midwinter is my favorite way. And what you want to do is start a new garden. If you're going to start a new garden bed, here's some ways that it'll make your life a little bit easier. If you're going to just add to your garden, then, scratch up the soil, toss your seeds. I'll go into it in the next slide. But if you're starting from scratch, there's 2 ways. I like number 2, but there's either you do the work, which is option number 1, where you're removing all the vegetation, you're getting rid of roots, especially if it's a species that you might not want to be there anymore, or a species that's non-native or invasive. You want to really remove all the roots and vegetation there. If you're trying to convert your lawn, you can either remove pieces of the grass, cut it out, and either just toss the sod and compost it, or flip the turf grass at the end of the summer, and it'll naturally compost. You'll have to do some weeding, but my favorite methods are like the low labor methods, because you can get more done that way. That's why option number 2 is my favorite method, because I love lasagna gardening. Solarization can work as well, but for solarizing, the best success is to set up in spring, and you'll get ready to plant in the fall. And you just put up some black landscape cloth. You can even do it with garbage bags. You can do it with cardboard, but having black really is a good idea, because what you're trying to do is cook all the vegetation in the soil, and just have that soil be totally done with unwanted plants. The negative for solarization for me is that if there are plants that you might want to be there, then you're cooking those up, as well as the grass or whatever else is there. I also find that solarization does not work for poison ivy. I mean, this could be obvious, but they, like anything with really deep tap roots and runners, they'll just grow across and find their way out. So you have to come up with some other options. But solarization is a good low effort option for getting your gardens. You're planting this in the spring and you want to plant in the fall. My favorite option is to think the year before and start a lasagna garden in the fall. And you're just layering it up with cardboard, grass, compost, leaves, and then doing that over and over again. And by the spring of next year, or even like midsummer, you got to kind of check on it. But I've planted my veggies straight into these lasagna gardens and they've been really happy. So I've been experimenting with this with native plants, and I think native plants are pretty, especially if you're using really strong species, I think that they'll do just fine in a lasagna garden. And that's my favorite way of just like low maintenance, starting realistically and having it be fun instead of always battling, breaking your back making these spaces. So if we're gonna, after we've prepped our garden, we're gonna act like bison or mishkore bijikawag, where we scratch up the earth and scatter seeds. And you want to do that right before the first snowfall so that the snow creates an insulating blanket over all your plants. It's good to at least cover a little bit of soil, but I think if you're even just like tamping it down with your feet or letting the seeds get contact with the soil, then the snow will just naturally do the rest. It's really important to label or mark out the seeded area. And even if you're going to do it in a notebook, just something to signify that you've done something in that space. Because if you're starting your garden in the fall, lots can happen. And then spring comes and you might not know exactly where you started this garden. So mark it out with flags or markers or a notebook. I brought this example because I just use pieces of stick that have been cut, and then I kind of have that as my marker for where these have started, and it'll biodegrade back into the ecosystem, and you might even have some critters living inside these natural markers. Like I said before, be careful what you pull. So make sure you properly ID things before you're pulling weeds in the areas that you've dropped seed the season before. So that was pretty easy. That's the easiest way in my perspective. The next way is outdoor seed trays. I think this is also a really easy way, but basically try to lay out most of the things you need here. You need a black tray or a seed tray of any kind. It could be a straight across tray. It could be a tray with plugs in it. And I have a nail in that photo because drainage holes are really important. So I like to think about recycling and being kind about the resources that are on the planet every time I do any work. So I have a lot of these seed trays, and I kind of have a rotation of, the ones that have the holes in them that have just come from wear and tear. Those are the ones that become my native plant garden trays because I'm going to pop holes in them anyways. So not everybody has that ability to have multiple seed trays, and if you buy some, put holes in them, it's fine. But try to think about that. Like, what do I have already around me that I can do these seed trays with? People have used plastic salad containers with holes that they pop in them. If you're making salad or you're buying takeout or any sort of clamshell, you can experiment with that and see what works. The best thing about the clamshell containers is that you don't have to buy mesh to squirrel proof things. You just poke more holes in the top to make sure there's breathing room, and close your clamshell container, and you've got yourself a little seeding tray that you'll pop outside and allow the snow and leaves to insulate and fall over. So I'm experimenting with that in my backyard. I have seed, I think there's an article for the Peterborough Master Gardeners that talks about this somewhere, and I'll see what happens and what the difference for success is with the seed tray and just clamshells, but I really think that it'll work just fine. And if you don't have seed trays, I just think it's great to experiment with what you have and start small. So labeling, you need water just to mist the soil, but I'll go into those steps: snow, leaves, some wire cutters, and some mesh. We talked about having chicken wire and plastic mesh to keep the critters out, but another thing is having some decoy pots around. So in the seed trays that you have, or when you've potted up plants, you know, keep some pots on the outside perimeter that just have soil in them, and the squirrels probably won't go in to the rest of your plants. And I think it's pretty funny because I've had decoy pots and they've worked quite well on my rooftop garden. And I found a chestnut tree that a squirrel planted in one of my decoy pots. So they want to be gardeners too. Give them some pots full of soil to do their little work, and you might have less of a battle with the native plants that you're already growing. So the steps for outdoor seeding trays is to add your drainage holes, fill them with soil, to fill the seeding tray with soil, or the plug tray, to scatter your seeds and just kind of sprinkle like 1 or 2 millimeters of soil on top and just kind of tamp that down. If you scatter your seeds too dense, then you're going to have a lot of plants competing for resources and space. So, you know, if you're using a plug tray, maybe about 2-3 seeds per plug. And when you're scattering just a big tray in itself, try to give space. You know, I think it's better to have, you know, 10 really strong plants than to have 50 plants that are all competing, that you're going to have to split up and divide later, like earlier than you should. It runs the risks of losing plants. And yeah, basically, yeah, after you've scattered the seeds, you're gonna cover with mesh or chicken wire, put some leaves on top, and allow the snow to just create a blanket of insulation on that. You can set your trays out in October and November or before snowfall, but our seasons have been kind of weird where the snow doesn't always stay on the ground, and I've been trying to take advantage of that by making seed trays in December or in January, and just, you know, if I see the snow is coming, I put my seed tray out and let the snow do its thing. And then any place that there's extra snow that hasn't melted, I shovel that and put it right on top of my outdoor seed trays, so that I'm continuing that insulation. Even if the weather's going to naturally start melting things, I'm moving snow to where I want it to be. That could run the risk of you introducing weed seeds to your seed tray, but I like to think of the weighing my battles, you know, and I want there to be more insulation on my plants, so that's what I do. These are just some visual examples from a group in Toronto called Project Swallowtail. They have a seed sitting program where members engage in seed sitting and they take care of native plants together and then swap them and share them. Project Swallowtail is really cool, and I think if folks in other towns, Kawartha Lakes, or anybody else who's listening wants to engage in something like this, it's a community-based grassroots group that establishes pollinator habitat in large and small areas. They look at boulevards, they look at waste spaces near parking lots, and, you know, community gardens, schools, backyards. But the goal is to basically create pollinator corridors from neighbors to neighbor, pieces of, you know, green space that just increase the native seed around Toronto. And it's amazing when you go to Toronto and you see Project Swallowtail signs or you see native plant gardens, you kind of start to like see them everywhere, and you're just like, wow, this is amazing. I don't know if this was like this 10 years ago. So I think it's a really cool initiative. I think it's a really great group of people. And one thing that I think really stands out is Project Swallowtail has Block ambassadors who self-identify as people that their community members can go to that will support them through this journey. And being a Block ambassador is really special because you're just like actively out there sharing your passion, teaching people. You can create events and all sorts of opportunities for learning, and of course give away plants and get other people to keep giving away plants. You can even trade some species between other people. So these are some examples here of what it looks like to put your plants to bed, and then what it might look like to insulate them in the winter. These are the same seed sitters, so, or 2 different people, but the same plants in the fall and in the winter. So on your left is the seed tray method. And see this person has also used plastic bottles, I believe, like large 2-liter bottles to create their seeds. And I think that's great because you might not have to pot up that container. You just let it do its thing, and based on how big the plants get, you might have to swap them out. But I love that method. I think it's great. It's DIY, it's cheap, and it's accessible. So in the lower photo, you can see just like the bed of snow on top, and it's pretty easy. Just set it and forget it, basically. And this one on the right is container gardening. So if you're going to be container gardening, what I've learned, what I think is really important, is just to know that native plants have a really deep root system. So you want to have deep pots for your native plants, and just enough space so that you're not going to have to be watering them all the time, because that can take a lot of resources, and the point is to have them not need so much water. But these are massive pots. These are great. And this person's been doing balcony gardening for a long time, and it's been really successful for them. So there's just some examples of what can happen. If you're seeding outdoors, seeds will germinate at different times, even in the same tray. The placement where you have it, the amount of insulation that you have, they all factor in. And native plants can start out really, really small. So you might think that you have nothing in your tray, and when you look closer, they're actually all over the place. So another reason why it's important to properly ID the plants that you think are weeds before you pull them. And I want to share a story about this seed tray that I had, because it was really exciting and also really weird. So I had a black seed tray that was full of black-eyed Susans and probably milkweed together. And they started growing and they were doing fine. And I had like all these plants coming up. And so I started separating them and putting them into larger containers, like I'll talk about later. But I went away for a month, and I left the seed tray, and I just kind of didn't touch it, and was like, the universe, the elements will take care of this. If they don't survive, they don't survive. Whatever. And when I got back, there were so many plants. So I potted those up, and I was grateful. Some died, some didn't. But then I decided, there's still so much soil left in this seed tray that I'm going to leave it for longer and see what happens. And then again, I had more plants growing. And it was like I had 3 different flushes of seeds that were able to germinate and grow in this one long seed tray. Maybe I put too many seeds in one tray, but what I want to kind of say about that is that I must not have been looking closely, and I just didn't see that they were there. But also, these seeds just were waiting for the exact conditions that they needed to grow. And me pulling some plants and popping a little bit more soil in and just kind of letting it do its thing, I had things showing up in July and in August, and we'll see if they survived, because I popped them in the ground being like, I don't know what's going to happen here. But I thought that was just such a cool thing to observe, that this seed tray was just like an endless giving tree, or giving plant tray. Preparing to pot up. This photo is what can happen if you seed a ton of seed trays, and it's a beautiful thing. But I think it's important to remember how many containers you're going to need, who they're going to go to, and are you going to have time to water all of this? And if you're going to be moving somewhere, you're going to have to move all of these or pop them in the ground. So, prepare for your seed trays and collect as many pots, yogurt containers. I've even seen people use like coffee, the bags that you get coffee in. So collect your containers, add some drainage holes, and get ready to pot up your plants, because you will need them. You want to stop your plants from being root bound. You want to make them strong. But good rule of thumb is kind of like 4 to 6 inches of size, and you can put 2 plants in a big enough container when you're potting it up, but you don't want to crowd them. You want to give them space to flourish. So potting up plants, basically when the seedlings look like they're crowded or they're way too big, and you see at least like 2 to 4 sets of true leaves. So in this photo, the person is collecting sema or tobacco plants, and they're potting them up. So there's about 4 or 5 plants in that one plug with the tweezers, and they're gonna gently just kind of pull that out, tease them out apart, and make a little divot in the pot and close that up. So yeah, I think tweezers are a really helpful thing to kind of gently pull out the seedlings, but you can use your hands, just be gentle. And again, when you've potted up your plants, you're gonna have to protect them from wildlife. Hoop houses could work, cold frames, that kind of thing. But I find mesh works just fine. And the plants, when they get big enough, will grow through the mesh. Yeah, like another story I had was I was growing Penstemon digitalis, so a type of beard tongue plant, and I found that the squirrels just like really, really loved that plant. There was no, they would pull it up and I would dig it back and pull it up and dig it back. And then finally the whole plant just got eaten. And I was really wondering, like, are there nutrients in these plants that wildlife is missing? You know, like, what is your fascination with this one plant? And why do you keep telling me that I'm not doing a good job of planting this plant or whatever it is? You know, maybe I'm making that too personal, but I think when we bring these things to the landscape, like the animals and the creatures, they all kind of know. They're like, oh, this is new. Like, I miss this. There's something that we're all kind of waking up to when these plants come to the landscape. And you know, take with that what you will. I think at a certain point, I plant enough knowing that nature's going to take some, but some species, some critters will be like really dedicated to uprooting that one plant that you plant over and over again. So if you want to really protect it, I keep on saying it because it's important. And of course, if you've potted up your plants and you've left them over the summer, your plants will be ready in the fall because they might not be large enough. But if you've done a really good job and timed it well, you've started your seed trays early enough in the fall, then they'll be ready for spring. I like to kind of wait a little bit longer just to make sure that all my plants are strong and ready to go in the ground. So I haven't really planted too many things in spring. I find that if you're going to plant in the summer, you definitely need to make sure you're watering more. The chance of them surviving the transplant is a little bit lower. It's not impossible, but you definitely have to baby them a little bit more than you would. So spring and fall are the best times to plant native plants, and I would say that fall is the absolute best time. If you're doing the refrigerator method, the most important things you need are Ziploc container, zip bags, paper towels, or some sort of vermiculite, like some sort of growing medium that isn't soil, just to hold the moisture. And yeah, and people also use sawdust. My method that I use is just paper towel and zip bags, and I'll go into kind of what you all need for that. So you can start that in late December to February. So if you wanted to try doing this method, now is the time you can do it. You use like a slightly damp paper towel, and if it's sopping wet or if it's dripping, that's really not what you want. That's how you're going to get a lot of mold. So you squeeze out that paper towel after it's gotten wet, and if it's like kind of dry to the touch, then that's moist enough. Or you can do something else. So once you take that paper towel, you scatter your seeds in there, and you make sure it's not too dense. You fold up the paper towel on top of each other and slide it into the Ziploc bag. If you are worried about putting too much moisture on the paper towel before you put the seeds in, then you could do this method, the whole like scattering seeds and folding the paper towel around it dry. Then when you put it in the Ziploc bag, you can mist inside there to just get it slightly damp. You're going to store it in the fridge for 6 to 8 weeks, but every plant's different, so it might need more time, it might need less time. I think that that's a pretty good rule of thumb, is 6 to 8 weeks. And periodically check your plants for mold or for sprouting. Some plants won't sprout when they're in the Ziploc bag because they need sun to get the message to sprout, but some will. So you want to make sure that you're giving those plants the chance at life and that you're just keeping an eye on things. I think that that's where my failures happen most, is that I'm just kind of put it in the back of my fridge and forget about it. So, try to set a timer, try to, check in every once in a while and really take care of those seeds, because we're choosing to make them wake up and come alive, right? So when we're done, and when you've reached that time mark, or you start seeing things germinating, you're going to move those seeds to trays or plugs, like I talked about in the outdoor seed tray method. So you're going to put soil in, and you're going to either lay your paper towel right on top of the seed tray, or try to tease out the plants and put them in the seed tray however you'd like. You can also tear that little paper towel around where the seeds are and just pop it right in the ground. It's like seed paper. And yeah, I think the only thing that you have to be careful about if you're gonna like move the seeds from the paper towel is the very first root, the radical, is really delicate. So sometimes they'll grow right through the paper towel, and if you're not being really careful, you can just break that, and you've essentially cut off the start of the plant living, and I don't know if they'll survive that. So I just like either place the whole paper towel down on a tray and sprinkle a little bit of soil on it, or I kind of rip off pieces and put it around the tray so that they have more space to grow. So once you do that, sprinkle a bit of soil on top, put them under grow lights if you have them, or just a sunny window, and water often. So spritz water it. If you use too heavy of a watering can, it might actually dig the seeds in too much, or you might use too much water. But if you don't spritz them enough and get them moist enough, then the seeds might actually go back into dormancy if you haven't seen the root expand. This is just an example, a visual example of what I'm talking about. So at the top is a dampened paper towel with I'm experimenting with grass seeds. They might not work. I think it might be better to direct sow grass seeds, but the other side is echinacea there. And I basically did this method, folded up the paper towel and put them in Ziploc bags, and then hid them in my fridge. So this year I've set a message on my phone, notification on my phone, and hopefully I can at least get echinacea seeds going. That would be great. And if anybody later has like hot tips to share, I would love to hear. So once your indoor plants are in seed trays, you're gonna have to harden them off. Don't just let your plants go straight outside. And if you've done this with vegetables, then you know exactly what I'm gonna start talking about. But you have to be really careful when you're hardening off your indoor plants. And one way that I like to start hardening off my plants is to actually just like touch my plants every once in a while. And I act like wind, or I act like a bird, or a creature that's like walking through the plants, right? So just tickle your plants, and they'll kind of learn to get a little bit stronger, and that'll help set them up for success when you're bringing your whole plant tray outside and getting it slowly used to being outdoors. So you're gonna want to bring your seeds out on a sunny cold day at short intervals. So like I'm telling you, like really start small, because if you do it too fast, things can happen really fast, and then your plants will just suddenly die or be totally wilted, or they would have been whipped around by the wind so much that they could just break off. So be really slow with hardening off your plants. And if you know that it's going to be really windy, or if you know the sun's a little bit too high in the sky, if there's hail, just kind of put it in shade, just protect them. But start small and extend the time outdoors slowly. I think for me, it takes I like to go for 2 weeks of doing this, and it can be really time consuming, but 10 minutes one day, 20 minutes another day, see how that goes, maybe 30 minutes, but you might even want to go even slower. And if you're doing this just like be home and check on your plants. There's been times where I've left my plants out while I'm hardening them off, and I get home and almost everything's dead, and that could be really sad. So I think this process when you're potting up your plants, especially when they're indoors, is really important to do slow. And hopefully you've had success up to this point, and hopefully what I've shared has helped you figure out some methods that could be easy and accessible for you. Because at this point, your plants are just getting ready to grow. Maybe they're already ready, and you're gonna want to plan what you're gonna do. Whether it's a pollinator garden, wildflower garden, they're all gonna be pollinator gardens anyways. But the thing that I want to really share is to remember what native plants do, and that's sleep, creep, leap. And it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 seasons for native plants to be fully established and for them to show their true colors. So be patient. The first season, plants are focusing on their roots forming. Water and ground cover will help a lot with just giving them a good basis for root growth and development. And if you add too many nutrients or too much water, that's going to make them weak over time. But there has to be like a perfect amount of watering when it's really dry, or watering when they start to go limp and look a little sad. I find for me, ground cover methods that are really awesome are I use a lot of straw, and I find that to be really great because, you know, bees and stuff can still go underground. It's not like wood mulch where that can be kind of hard to dig. And the best thing that I've heard is strawberries as ground cover. You can just dig up strawberries from your lawn and transplant them into whatever space you're working at, or, you know, and they will naturally reseed as the plants kind of grow and take up space. So I'm experimenting with strawberries as ground cover right now, and I'm really excited to see what's going to happen this spring. And hopefully I can just like reduce a lot of the ground cover, like the other kinds of mulching that I use, like straw and sometimes some wood chips. So I've talked about sleep. The next thing is creep. And this is usually the second season where plants start to creep and they get a little bigger and they spread. They need less water. You're going to see some flowers, but not as much as in the next season of growth, where these plants are going to leap. And this is when your garden's really filled in. There's less need for ground cover, and it's I wrote it in my notes as Bloom City. So you're just going to be looking around, and this whole garden is going to be bumping with flowers of all kinds, with pollinators, and you're going to be like, wow, this is what I thought would happen in year one. So it might take a couple growing seasons for things to mature and get going, but be patient. You can collect seed the first year, but I would let your plants just continue naturally seeding until they look nice and healthy, and then spread it. And that's kind of, you know, some good ways to start with this. Final reminders are that spring and fall are the best times for planting, that you don't want to water too much. I kind of treat my plants poorly. I give them a little bit of a tough time, but I think that in giving them a tough time, as the climate gets like drier in the summer and hotter, we're actually preparing our plants for strength. So water in the first year of growth, don't water more than you need to, but really think about these beginning stages of the plants that you're setting up, those being the way that they're kind of going to be set up for the rest of time potentially. But you want to set your plants up so that they don't need water all the time. And the more you water them, the more they're going to need water. So the less you water, the deeper the roots are going to go and the stronger they're going to be, and better to adapt. So that's, I think, a really big takeaway. Experiment with natural ground covers and save your seed when your gardens are doing well. Share your seeds, divide things, give them away, and get excited about growing more things. When you have a native plant garden, also maybe consider using apps like iNaturalist and pay attention to the life that you've brought with your native plants. So Who uses the space? Do you have new birds coming to your property? Are there pollinators or other wildlife that you've never noticed before? Just get curious, document it, and share with others. Finally, I just want to give thanks to Project Swallowtail Seed Sitting Program. I think that they're doing some really great grassroots work, and that a lot of different communities could follow suit with what is happening in Toronto in a community-based way. I also want to give thanks to the different knowledge holders that have influenced and informed me over my life. Trondek from Yukon Territories, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, traditional knowledge holders, and also, you know, the parents, the guardians, whoever in your life sets you up for a good foundation for caring for living things. I think it's important to give thanks for all that. One really great resource that I'm gonna share a resource list with everybody who's kind of shared their emails with me as registration of all my sources and all the things that might be helpful. But if there's any resource that you really want to take away from this, I think the Prairie Nursery Seed Propagation Information List, excuse me. I think I saw somebody in the chat talk about Prairie Nursery. This list is really great, and it kind of tells you all the different ways and the days of nodding pink onion needs cold moist stratification and about 30 days of this stratification. And if you wanted to direct seed it, it'd be best in the fall. So this is a great resource. There's all sorts of plants on this PDF, and you can just search it. And with that, I just want to say thank you. And I'm not sure if we've gone over time. We're making pretty good time, which is wonderful. So thanks everyone for listening. I hope I kind of taught some new things and shared a bit of a new perspective. And I'll open it up for discussions or questions. But first, I think Christine might want to help us in this next little part of our conversation.
Yeah, well, before we go into discussion, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you, Samantha. Your enthusiasm is contagious. I think I can speak for everyone in saying that you presented us with a lot of useful information. I've learned a lot. And I certainly appreciate your perspective on things. You always bring a deeper connection to Mother Earth and relate things back to nature and animals. And I think that's really important to keep in mind when taking on projects like Native Seed Starting. So for that, thank you. And yeah, well, I think get on to questions. I noticed there were a few that have popped up in the chat. And so maybe we can start with those. So the first question is, what about getting seeds of the same species from another area, province, or state? Is this good or bad genetically? Can I order my seeds from Prairie Moon? So I think, Samantha, you've touched on this. I don't know if you want to take that question on.
Yeah, I think it is. I think you should prioritize, if you can, getting seeds from as close to your local region as possible. If you join the North American Native Plant Society, that's a great way to connect with other people who are nearby and collect the seeds that you're interested in having. If you can't go find them, collect them in an ethical way, either in nature or by collecting or by connecting with people. I think the other thing I would suggest is think about ecoregions. So prairie, I think they're in Wisconsin. That's a little bit far, but if you're kind of looking at what kind of ecology is happening in the region, if it's matching where you're at and you really can't find seeds somewhere else, I think that I wouldn't use it for conservation, but I would definitely consider it in your own personal gardens or in a pollinator garden that isn't going to be considered a conservation effort garden.
Great.
Did you want to add something, Amy, to that question?
Yeah, just that at this point, I feel like so many seeds have come from Prairie Moon and other large seed distributors that it's like if I'm collecting locally, it's the same thing. Just that they have a lot of stock and species availability that's hard to find in Ontario growers.
There's another place I know of to get local organic seed, the Canadian Organic Seed Company. Christine Halbert, she's a master organic gardener, runs a wonderful farm out in Beaverton. And she has everything available online, but she does have quite an extensive native seed collection as well as pollinator mixes and things like that. So it's a good resource to keep in mind. That's great. Okay, I'm just going to refer back to our questions now. And so, what is the germination rate of winter sowing in container versus direct sowing? I can say in my experience that direct sowing, Mother Nature takes care of everything. When you move things indoors, there's certainly so many more variables to consider, variables that maybe are unknown to us at the time that, you know, we have to gather experience to recognize. But that said, it shouldn't deter you from trying. That's how we kind of figure out how to do things best. And one thing to bear in mind is just the genetic, or pardon me, the germination success rates of plants varies drastically from species to species. So something like common milkweed, you know, has a very, very high success rate for germination. They're, you know, hardy seeds, and you really, it's very difficult to mess up. They're kind of self-sufficient. That said, there are other species where your germination success rate may be as low as 7%. And so with those native plants, it's certainly a lot more challenging to have success. And so it's something you shouldn't beat yourself up over. It's, as I said, a lot of trial and error, figuring out how things work best. One point I thought of when you were mentioning, you know, preparing our plants for transplant outdoors and hardening. One thing that I do when I do start my seeds indoors is set up a small fan where my seeds are growing, and that fan, you know, it mimics the wind, and so it helps toughen up those stems, things like that. Another thing that I've found is having the right distance between plants to the light source. If you have a light that's mounted on a ceiling, your plants are going to stretch out trying to reach that light. And so you'll often get plants that are maybe a little too tall, underdeveloped as far as their blooms and branches and whatnot. So lowering that light source closer to the plants, they have to do less work to use that sunlight, and they'll be a lot bushier, a lot healthier going out. And you can just, again, you know, as the plant grows, you just move the light a little higher away. So
yeah. And if you don't have a grow light, to consider, if you're putting them near a window, to put them on a table and have them just a little bit raised. You know,
yeah.
I get it. Grow lights are complicated, so, you know, you can do lots of things. I've actually heard of people using, if they're living in basement apartments, and they've created their own little like cold cellars outside of those dugout windows, and that can be a place that you have your plants growing, and I've seen some pretty cool success with that. So that could be an option to get creative with.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Are there any more questions? Okay, and so what kind of soil do you use? Potting soil, seed starting soil?
I think any soil will work. I really do. I don't think you need to have soil with such like potting, like seed starting soil. I don't even think is necessary, because that's more for vegetables. They need a lot of nutrients when they're starting, but you can use some folks use like a mycorrhizal soil medium, and that's just kind of like clean soil that's just got its basic stuff in it. But you can use potting soil. You can You can get creative. I sometimes, if you have worms, you can add a little bit of the like just a tiny bit of vermicompost and mix that in with the soil that you're using if you want to give them more nutrients. But the thing about native plants is that they often don't need a ton of nutrients. They're depending on the native plant that you're growing, some of them won't need anything and they'll just grow just fine. They'll actually do better. So Christine, I don't know if you have a specific soil that you swear by, but I kind of use what I have.
I agree. Native plants, I mean, so many of them are mistakenly classified as weeds. And I think, I mean, it kind of sums it up. They really grow anywhere. Well, I shouldn't say anywhere. Some seeds are specific to certain areas, but within their habitats, they're really, designed to be successful under, hard conditions to really use the resources around them. So I don't do anything special. I know with a recent garden we installed in City of Kawartha Lakes, there's a section with a better pro mix, and a section that we just left alone. And I mean, if you want to have super successful plants, go ahead and use something like that, because I mean, they almost look like mutant plants. They just take everything up and they're so successful with it. But really, given that they are so hardy and designed to meet the conditions that they live in, anything really works.
Mhm.
All right, and then I think there was one more question. Let me just see. And okay, so what should the spacing of your mesh be when you protected this, or when you're protecting seeds from wildlife?
You could go really, really small and your plants will be absolutely safe. But then as they grow, you're going to need to have some sort of stake to kind of arch the mesh over. If the mesh is too thin that the plants can't grow through, then they're going to be suppressed and they might actually not survive. But I don't remember the kind of sizing for mesh, but I'd say about like not an inch. Think about the hands of a squirrel. Think about what can make its way in there and go smaller. So I think it's like is it a centimeter? That's what I was thinking. So the peanut gallery told me a centimeter is a good spacing for mesh, and then at least the plants can grow through if you don't get to them in time.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, and does anybody else have a question, a hack, anything that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah.
So the one thing I've actually haven't gone into the foray of native plants yet, but I have experience growing daylilies. That was my passion in the years past, and I've done everything from basement growing to growing outside. The two things that are hacks for me is that the marker that you showed, always make sure that you're using a waterproof marker. If I've ever been involved in labeling anything, I used a regular marker once, and of course, after a rain or a winter season, everything's gone and you don't know what you have, right? Especially when you're cross-pollinating daylilies, you have seeds in a pot, and if they're all daylilies, but they're all different varieties, they all look the same when they grow. It's not just the same in native species where they could be, this is milkweed and this is penstemon or whatever. So that would be one tip I have. Another thing too that I found, as long as you're being responsible, I had a hard time once getting enough seed trays for myself. I actually went to the dollar store and I went and bought solo cups, and I actually put holes in the bottom of it. And the fact that you can go buy a big stack of 50 or buy multiples, I used them for years and years and years because you can just keep growing with them. And I
Yeah.
found that easier because I had the same spacing all the way through. So those would be my two hacks that I've used from my experience that would be helpful for others. So
Mm-hmm. And actually, thank you for sharing that. I love the idea of all using one size because you can use those trays to put your pots in, and so then you can carry them all really easily, right? And one thing that I didn't think about but is really important is you can go to your local plant nursery, or in the spring when everybody's planting their plants, and or even in the fall people start getting rid of pots. You can get pots and seed trays just because they're going to be thrown out anyways. So you can do a potted, like just a plant pot drive and collect that way. And I know that Project Swallowtail members do that often, and that's how they get their resources for seed starting and potting up. And Brandy has a question, so whenever you're ready.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed it. And I definitely echo what Christine was saying. Your enthusiasm is contagious and just keeps mine going too. So I did want to say that, so I fall sow, and I don't know what I am doing wrong, but anytime I fall sow directly into the ground, I can't find my plants. Like, and I leave my volunteers. I've had some happy volunteers that I've been very happy to find, some panicled aster, some goldenrods, etc. So, oh, okay, these are wonderful gifts in my garden. But the ones that I put there, they're not there. But the ones that I fall sow directly into pots, and then I leave my pots out in like a little stand or whatever. And sometimes they get dug up or whatever, but generally it's been pretty successful. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong for direct sowing into the ground. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
The one thing that comes to mind to me is that the last couple of years, our winters have been inconsistent. We've had some rather warm flashes, and followed immediately by, horrendous snow and ice. And so oftentimes our seeds start, they start their propagation process, their awakening during those warm phases, and then they just get wiped out with the cold. Similar with a lot of our insects, they wake up from dormancy and unfortunately, succumb to the weather. They get trapped, and so that would be my first guess. I don't know, Samantha, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Two-ish thoughts. One thought I have is, are you using ground cover? And if that ground cover is if you're using oak leaves as a ground cover, oaks can actually take a long time to biodegrade, and so they can almost like make it difficult for the plants to pop their way through. Where if you have a natural leaf mulch, they can get through easier. But also sometimes you might want to just kind of pull it away from where the seeds are once the spring comes, just so that they can have more sunlight hit them.
Well, I can say you're probably spot on with
I hate when
that.
that happens.
I have Norway maple leaves, so, and I know those are similar. They take a while to degrade, so that very well could be an issue. Whereas in my pots, I don't put the Norway maple leaves. So that's a really good point. And I also use wood mulch. So I know you guys were saying straw is better, and so something that I'll be considering for the future.
The space that I'm converting is wood mulch, and I've been slowly pulling it away or just putting soil on top.
Yeah.
But it's going to take some time, and that's okay. So there was a person, I went on a garden tour with Douglas Counter, and Douglas Counter is an incredible seed saver and native gardener who's done a lot for boulevard gardens and native plant gardens in Ontario. So Douglas Counter talked to me about a Norway maple. Actually, that was what triggered the reminder, and how people struggle so much to grow plants to grow native plants under a Norway maple. But the thing that's really cool about native plants is sometimes you can follow the instructions of where you think these plants will want to be, and they'll actually find somewhere completely different. So I would really just experiment with putting your native plants in different spots, because they might just find the one perfect place, and every resource that you ever hear will say that they don't want to be there, but they will be. And I even spoke to someone earlier about cardinal flowers, and how one person really can't get them to grow, and this other person's been like, they grow in all the places in my garden and I don't know why. So, try to put it in different spots. One thing that Douglas also did was redirect his storm drain so that more moisture went towards the Norway maples. And so if you can use the water that you already have on your property to direct it in a place that plants that might appreciate more moisture, or plants that have some competition with other trees or other plants they might need more moisture from, use the resources you have. Just take an extra bit of eavesdropping or that black tubing and redirect the water. You might even be able to get your neighbor's water and send it that way too. So I hope that kind of helps a bit.
Oh, it definitely does. No, thank you so much. And then one of the things that I was going to say, the hacks that I have is I've been video recording. So I've been recording my plants every month to see how they've grown over time. And I post them on YouTube. I'm not saying everybody should do that, but I do like a garden tour and then share that information to see, because your butterfly milkweed is so puny for so long, and then all of a sudden it looks great in the summertime. But it's good to know so that you can plan your garden design if you want to incorporate design into your methods, as opposed to perhaps like the meadow options or whatever. But that kind of like capture has been really, really helpful for me to learn the plants, but then also to connect to the plants. So like, I'm a busy person, and if I didn't, so now that I've done this and I've got a little following, like I feel like, okay, I got to get this done. But it keeps me connected to the plants. Oh, this is what they look like in June. This is what they look like in July. And it's been something that has allowed me to like take a moment, even though life is busy, to just see where they're at, and then to pay attention. And also the video capture has been really helpful with my seedlings in particular, because I did use those like Sharpies and they faded away and I didn't know what anything was. And so I could go back to those old videos and say, oh yes, that was like great blue lobelia or whatever. And I still made mistakes, but it's been very helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And people have talked about creating a cotyledon catalog where the beginning plants are all photographed so that you know what to look for. And I think in my resource page, I'll be sharing something from BC, from Satin Flower Nurseries, but I'm sure there's a resource somewhere for Ontario. And that's awesome. And I'm really glad you shared that aspect of building a relationship with plants, because before we go, I want to share something that I learned from Terry Lynn Brandt, who is a Haudenosaunee farmer. And she talked about the importance of just building a relationship with the plants that you have, treating them, not even just the plants you have, but like as you would make relationships with friends, try to choose a couple plants that you can become good friends with, and know what their likes are, know what their dislikes are, know their full name, know their nicknames, so their Latin name, their indigenous name, the common names. Learn everything you can about one or two plants, maybe each year, and build your friend circle that way. And I think in the plant world, it's so daunting. You want to know everything all the time, but to really just focus on a couple and build that relationship and go from there. I love that you shared that, and thank you for, I really wanted to kind of share that with folks too. So thank you for bringing that up, because I love that she shared that with my class. And I think we should all think about the plant world as another being that we can create relationships with, right? Yeah.
I might just add to that too, like just like to follow in with that, because it really does feel kind of nice to talk about that piece, is that when you do take that time to learn those plants and you pay attention to those plants, then you do notice all the pollinators that are coming to visit it. And then you get interested in that. What is that? What is that green bee I've never seen before? And you get really intrigued, and then that just builds, and then you share with your friends and your family, and then it builds that circle even more. So I really enjoy what you just said, and I connect to it very much. So anyhow, thank you so much for everything today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's lots of really great minds that build on all of us, right? So there's a beautiful chapter in Robin Wall Kimmerer's book about bringing animacy to our language, where English language kind of sees plants as it, and they're all living creatures. So why are we using that kind of objectifying language? And there's just so many great resources. So it's been a pleasure to chat with everybody, and I'm sure we could go on, but I'm glad to see that everybody's in a good place and really excited, and just try the refrigerator method if you can, just and see what happens. There's no harm if you have a couple seeds, you know, left over. Maybe you'll have more success than I do. It's been a pleasure, everybody.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful way to spend the evening.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.